Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has announced while chairing the 34th Summit of the African Peer Review Mechanism a $1 million worth package to support the evaluation process and the implementation of its recommendations. Algeria is one step closer to winning a seat in the African Union's Peace and Security Council for the North African region after securing 32 of the required 32 votes. And the Secretary General of the Arab League, Ahmed Abul Ghait, has reaffirmed at a meeting of the League's Economic and Social Council in Cairo that his organization firmly rejects any attempt to displace Palestinians from their land, underlining that Gaza is not for sale. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. Good afternoon. First, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has chaired in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the 34th Summit of the African Peer Review Mechanism in his capacity as President of the Forum of Heads of State and Government of this mechanism. The forum was held today in the presence of several heads of state and government, members of the African mechanism, along with the heads of various AU structures and institutions. In his opening speech, the Algerian president reiterated Algeria's commitment as a founding member of this mechanism to play its role in addressing current challenges, especially those related to strengthening the rule of law, fighting corruption, and promoting social justice and human rights. These challenges, the President of the Republic went on to say, require us to work in a spirit of solidarity and responsibility to overcome the financial difficulties that limit the ability of this African mechanism to meet the lofty objectives for which it was created. Let's listen to the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune.
وأود هنا أن أؤكد مجددا التزام الجزائر كدولة مؤسسة لهذه الآلية بالحرص على تفعيل دورها في مواجهة التحديات الراهنة، لا سيما فيما يتعلق بترسيخ سيادة القانون ومكافحة الفساد وتعزيز العدالة الاجتماعية وحقوق الإنسان، وهي تحديات تفرض علينا العمل بروح من التضامن والمسؤولية لتجاوز الصعوبات المالية التي تحد من قدرة الآلية الإفريقية للتقييم من قبل النظراء على تحقيق الأهداف السامية التي أنشئت من أجلها.
In the face of the critical financial situation of the African Peer Review Mechanism, President Tebboune called on member states to meet their financial obligations by announcing, in this context, a voluntary contribution worth $1 million to support the evaluation process and the implementation of its recommendations.
وانطلاقا من التزام الجزائر بدعم الآلية وتمكينها من أداء مهامها، قررت بلادي تقديم مساهمة طوعية بقيمة $1 مليون أمريكي لدعم عملية التقييم وتنفيذ التوصيات المنبثقة عنها.
Meanwhile, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, who, let's recall, is the President of the Forum of Heads of State and Government of the African Peer Review Mechanism, has insisted on the need to strengthen the role of the African Peer Review Mechanism as an effective platform to promote governance and continue working to find sustainable solutions to the challenges facing the countries of the continent.
جدد التأكيد بأن الجزائر ستظل شريكا فاعلا في دعم هذه الآلية وتعزيز مكانتها داخل الاتحاد الإفريقي، وأدعو الدول الأعضاء إلى العمل على توحيد جهودنا لتحقيق أهدافنا المشتركة النبيلة. وأعلن رسميا عن افتتاح أشغال الدورة 34 لقمة منتدى رؤساء الدول وحكومات الآلية الإفريقية للتقييم من قبل النظراء.
That was the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. It should be noted that before the start of the session, the President of the Republic had received several African leaders. Algeria is one step closer to winning a seat in the African Union's Peace and Security Council for the North African region in elections postponed until next month after securing 32 of the required 33 votes. Algeria, which will be running for the post again in the postponed elections, beat Morocco in every round with a gap of almost double, thus excluding it from the race after 6 rounds, during which the kingdom demonstrated its ability to compete with Algeria given the large gap in the number of votes, 30 votes against only 17 for Morocco in the 6th round, before Algeria obtained 32 votes, which reflects Algeria's weight on the African continent and its strong position. In these elections, which took place on the first day of the AU Executive Council meeting, Algeria beat the other 2 countries in the race, Libya and Morocco, for the 2025-2027 term. As the required number of votes, 33, that is 2/3 of the votes of the voting states, was not reached, the AU Commission was forced to postpone the vote until next month. The Speaker of the People's National Assembly, Brahim Boughali, has called on France to officially recognize its full and complete responsibility for its nuclear crimes in the Algerian Sahara, decontaminate the sites of nuclear radiation and waste, and compensate the victims and their families in line with the loss and damage they have been enduring. Jamal Silmani has more details in this report.
Speaking at the opening of a study day organized by the People's National Assembly held under the theme Nuclear Explosions in Algeria, a Crime Against Humanity and the Environment, attended by members of the government, representatives of government and official agencies, and parliamentarians, Boughali underlined that the consequences of these nuclear explosions are the responsibility of France, in reaffirming that Algeria will never accept to turn this page without accountability and will not tolerate that this crime remains unrecognized.
Algeria, which paid a heavy price to gain its independence and recover its freedom and sovereignty, will never accept that this chapter be closed without accountability, nor will it accept that this crime remains unrecognized. Therefore, we collectively demand, first, an official acknowledgement from France of its full responsibility for these nuclear crimes, not just a vague political recognition, but one followed by a clear moral commitment. Second, compensating the victims of the nuclear explosions and their families in line with the scale of the tragedy they endured, and guaranteeing the legitimate right of Algerians to justice. Third, France must take responsibility for cleansing the lands polluted by nuclear radiation and nuclear waste, and hand over to Algeria the complete archive of the test sites so that our experts can assess the damage and take the necessary measures accordingly.
On this occasion, Mr. Boughali reiterated that independent Algeria, strong in its rights, is committed to its legitimate claims, will never deny the sacrifices of its children, and will not tolerate its martyrs and victims being reduced to mere figures in silent reports. Mr. Boughali also proposed the setting of an international day for the victims of nuclear explosions to coincide with the 13th of February, a date to serve as a permanent reminder of the suffering of the victims and highlight the imperative of holding the perpetrators of these heinous crimes accountable.
Meanwhile, Brahim Boughali announced in response to the popular demand in Algeria the issue of the criminalization of colonialism will be opened within the APN and will follow its course, stating that the Assembly will plead for the defense of the martyrs and the rights of nuclear explosion victims. Some 30 international organizations fighting for peace, disarmament, and human rights around the world have called on France to assume its historical and legal responsibility for the nuclear explosions carried out in the Algerian Sahara, noting that this requires the reclassification of documents relating to these tests, the cleanup of decontaminated areas or contaminated areas, and compensation for the victims. Saïd Boughazi tells us more in this report.
We, the signatory organizations below, representing affected communities, indigenous peoples, defenders of the ban on nuclear weapons, environmental protection, human rights, and the promotion of peace, meet today to commemorate the 65th anniversary of the first French nuclear test carried out in the Algerian Sahara on 13 February 1960, wrote the signatory organizations in a joint statement made public. This nuclear test was not an isolated event that, but the start of a series of 16 other successive tests, 11 of which were carried out after the Evian Agreements of 19th March 1962, which gave Algeria its independence. These 17 nuclear tests and the 40 additional nuclear experiments involving the dispersion of plutonium left a tragic legacy of widespread radioactive contamination and serious damage to the health of the local populations in the affected areas, the organizations wrote. They pointed out that decades later the effects are still being felt, as evidenced by the alarming rise in cancer rates and chronic respiratory diseases, as well as ongoing environmental degradation, which has seriously affected natural resources, disrupted livelihoods, and weakened the socio-economic fabric of local communities.
And now the Speaker of the House of Commons in the British Parliament, Lindsay Hoyle, has stressed the importance of Algeria for the United Kingdom as a political and economic partner and its role for peace and stability in North Africa and the Sahel region. During a meeting with the Algerian ambassador to London, Nourdine Yazid, at the headquarters of the Parliament, which has for the occasion displaced the national emblem, Lindsay Hoyle praised the quality of the bilateral cooperation in the different areas of interest, considering it necessary for the country to take advantage of the abundant natural resources that Algeria has by expanding and deepening the partnership to other sectors, including energy and tourism. The Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Lounes Magraman, has co-chaired at the Ministry headquarters with the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Republic, Alexandra Papadopoulou, the fifth session of the Algerian-Greek political consultations, according to a statement from the ministry. The session provided an opportunity to review the state of bilateral relations and to consider ways of strengthening and developing them, notably by planning the third session of the Joint Economic, Scientific and Technical Cooperation Commission, in addition to the exploitation of the opportunities available in both countries in various fields, including investment promotion, trade, culture, energy, tourism, transport, services, and health. The Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of the National Community Abroad, Sofiane Shaib, has received the visiting Greek Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of European Affairs, Alexandra Papadopoulou. According to a ministry press release, during this meeting, the Secretary of State and his Greek counterpart discussed the state of bilateral relations and the prospects for developing them, in addition to international and regional issues of common interest. The A3 Plus Group at the UN Security Council in New York has expressed its concern at the resurgence of foreign military interference in Yemen, including Zionist airstrikes, calling on all foreign parties to respect Yemen's sovereignty and avoid any military escalation. Said Bouazi has more details.
The A3 Plus Group, Algeria, Somalia, Sierra Leone and Guyana, in a speech delivered on its behalf by Mohammed Rabia Yusuf, member of Somalia's permanent mission to the United Nations, urged all foreign parties to respect Yemen's sovereignty and refrain from any military escalation, stressing at the same time the importance of respecting the ceasefire in Gaza, which will undoubtedly contribute to de-escalation with a view to lasting peace in the region. The Somali diplomat also stressed the unwavering support of the states in the group for the mediation efforts led by the UN, as well as for the regional mediation efforts, including those led by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, aimed at achieving a political settlement through Yemeni management of the conflict. In this respect, the A3 Plus group expressed its conviction that the stability of Yemen is essential to the security of the region, advocating a peaceful political process led and managed by the Yemenis under the aegis of the United Nations.
And the Secretary General of the Arab League, Ahmed Abul Ghait, has reaffirmed at a meeting of the League's Economic and Social Council in Cairo that his organization firmly rejects any attempt to displace Palestinians from their land, underlining that Gaza is not for sale. The officials stressed that Gaza is part of the future Palestinian state, which would be established within the 1967 borders, with East Al-Quds as its capital, in line with the two-state solution. Ahmed Abul Ghait also underlined that the Palestinian question was a central cause for Arabs, both individuals and governments. He added that these attempts to displace the Palestinians constitute a blatant injustice and an attack on their rights. And in the south of the besieged Gaza Strip, Palestinian officials have denounced the obstruction by the Zionist occupation army of the transfer of patients and the access to essential medical care via the Rafah crossing between the enclave and Egypt. Said Bougazi reports.
The Director General of the Palestinian Ministry of Health, Munir El-Barsh, quoted by the media, said that the Zionist occupation army is obstructing the transfer of patients via the Rafah border crossing and only authorizes a limited number of people in violation of the conditions set out in the current ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip. He added that the number of patients authorized to travel is less than 50 out of the 150 patients who were previously allowed out on a daily basis. El-Barsh said that the Zionist occupying forces were delaying the implementation of the humanitarian protocol attached to the ceasefire agreements, particularly the terms relating to humanitarian and medical aspects, including the denial of access to fuel and electrical generators, as well as medical equipment in hospitals. He stressed that sick and injured children and the elderly face the threat of death due to the blocking of access to essential medical supplies. Munir El-Barsh called on the international community to intensify pressure on the occupation to comply with its obligations and implement the humanitarian protocol in order to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip.
And finally, the Zionist occupation authorities have expelled from occupied Al-Quds Palestinian detainees recently released under the current ceasefire agreement in Gaza, according to the governorate of Al-Quds, while the Palestinian Prisoners Club has indicated that the Zionist occupation forces have arrested since mid-January around 380 Palestinians in the governorates of Jenin, Tulqaram and Tubas in the occupied West Bank, where the Zionist entity has stepped up its attacks on the region's inhabitants. That's the last piece of news of our news bulletin today. Let's move on now to our weekly programs. The situation in the occupied territories of Palestine, followed by the economic review by my colleague Said Bougazi. As for me, I'll meet again tomorrow. Thank you.
The UN's Mine Action Program Chief in the occupied